We're here with Doug Wagner. He is the writer and creator of many a title, such as Plastic, Vinyl, Plush, The Ride, Beware the Eye of Odin, and Klik Klik Boom, which is now available in trade paperback in your comic shop. So make sure you're picking that up. As soon as you're listening to this episode, I hope you guys enjoy the episode and decide to go pick up his books because they are fantastic. I am a big fan of his work. All of those are found by Image Comics, by the way, which is one of my favorite comic labels of all time. So welcome to the Making Comics podcast, Doug.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, guys. I was looking forward to it all day. So I appreciate you including me in this.
Oh, perfect. And like we always like to do at the beginning of the episodes, we have a drink, and Doug is joining us. So instead of our normal beers that we're doing, we're actually going to do some whiskey. So whiskey is the preference of the guest of honor here. And so I'm starting off with Glenfiddich 15.
What?
Which is...
Oh, my.
I know. Dude.
Well,
well, we're doing whiskey. I'm just gonna like flex $100 bottle. That's what I'm gonna do.
Well, it's
the
only kind of whiskey I buy. Is the
Bravo.
Yeah.
So, and only the best for our guest of honor. So,
I mean,
that's
I'm a little upset that you only do this during the podcast and we aren't doing this in person because I feel like I'm getting ripped off a little bit. But
next time, if you're at Amazing Con Las Vegas again, we will definitely have a drink if you're up for it.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
Keith, what do you got?
Okay, so I didn't bring the bottle, but I went with the Woodford Reserve for the podcast. So for me, I've got a nice, you can see before that's probably a good solid finger before the ice was in there. So it's good sipping. Woodford Reserve was my drink of choice tonight.
Excellent, Doug.
My wife makes me drink out of a sippy cup because sometimes I spill stuff, but I'm just doing plain old Bullet bourbon. So
all right,
can't go wrong with that.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Keith got me a bottle of Buffalo Trace for Christmas. And so I haven't seen him since he got it for me. So I'm looking forward to picking that up from him and having a couple of glasses with him. So
yeah, damn thing's still sitting right there. Right there.
You lucky.
Someday, Scott.
Yeah, very soon. Very soon. All right, cool. So, hey, this is a process podcast, and we love to talk about the process of making comics. So I kind of wanted to start off by mentioning something I did and kind of seeing how you do that same process. So I'm in the midst of finishing up a short story with my writer, and we're doing a bit of Marvel method these days where, I'm trying to think of, I was like, hey man, this is the premise. It's kind of like pre-apocalypse. These are the characters. He knew the characters. I'm like, how do we get these characters into the story? How do we do that? Do you have a good idea? So he kind of laid out the plot, kind of broke it down for me per page. And we went from there. And usually what happens is I'll kind of do my script on top of it first, just to kind of let him know what I was thinking these characters are saying, how the interactions are going along with the art. And then he jazzes it up. He does his amazing work on top of it. And we get this nice combination of a script on top of the art. Now, what's your process when you're working with artists, maybe potentially short stories or just your stories in general? Like, do you like to go full script or do you go a little loose or what's that like for you?
It can be a mix. I think I've offered multiple times to try to do the Marvel method, Marvel style plot with several artists, but most artists don't want that. Most artists want a full script, at least in the people I've worked with. I think the only person that's ever been like, yeah, I'll be okay with that was Brian Stelfreeze.
Right on.
And it was only for certain parts. He's like, hey, leave the action to me. Just tell me kind of what you want it to be. But, the rest of it, I want script. And so for the most part, like I work pretty closely, especially with the Image books, like with all of my creators. And Daniel Hilliard has done the majority of my books. And dude, it starts from like, I hit him with a log line kind of situation. And he's like, oh, I like this idea. Let's run with this one. Then I go to like a paragraph. And then I go to a full summary. And then I go, issue by issue. I break it down issue by issue so we know where all the, issues
get
in.
Get the skeleton of it down. Yeah.
And then I go to full script. And then, that's another, like, here, what do you think? Daniel prefers scene by scene. He doesn't want the whole thing all at once.
Oh, interesting.
He says he likes to kind of be surprised a little bit. And so, it's like, here's a scene, and we'll kind of, go through that one, and he'll tell me if he has any problems with it or whatever. And we kind of work together. Then he sends me layouts. Then he'll go to pencils and inks. And so it's a very like collaborative process throughout the whole thing, where even with Doug Dabbs on Klik Klik Boom and Tim Odland on Beware Thou Odin, it was very much a collaborative process to where at the end of it, you feel like you did it together.
Yeah. I mean, just listening to that process, that's what it sounds like. Keith, have you ever experienced something like that where the artist kind of wanted it scene by scene?
I have never experienced that. I think that's really fun, though. It's interesting, right? Because what I'm so used to, I think, and Doug, what's interesting is, again, I'm processing that as you're talking. There's no real need for an artist to know it all. No. Like they're not acting it, actors, sure. If you're Kaiser Soze, then it's probably very important to know early on, before you've been revealed as Kaiser Soze, that you are in fact that person. And the writers know what's going on. But yeah, I was like, that actually makes perfect sense on why someone would want to be surprised. And it's pretty interesting. I've never come across that, but it makes sense.
I think for him too, it's in smaller chunks. It's easier for him to work on that, say, during a week than it is to go, oh my God, I've got these 22 issues and I won't hear from Doug for the next month. Mm-hmm. So we're communicating constantly throughout that whole process. Mm. And so I think he enjoys that. And there's a trust level there too, right? Like he expects me to say, hey, just so you know, this character is Kaiser Soze, or right, this character is carrying a gun. Just, you're going to need to know that in the next scene, kind of thing. So there's a trust level there too, of like, I think we've just learned to work together, and I know what to tell him and not tell him, those kind of things. So I think, yeah, it's a process, and it works. Doug Dabbs and Brian Stelfreeze, they demand full scripts. They want the whole issue, where Daniel and I work completely different.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never done that myself, and I think that's because mostly I'm doing creator-owned work, so I'm usually working on my characters. So when I'm in the process with my writer, it's like I want to know everything going on, and I think that's more so just a personal attachment thing, and I need to make sure everything is right, like with each character and what's going on with them. And then plus we're working on, this. It's one of those things where this may be a singular story or a two-part story, but it's all connecting moving forward, and so for me, it's just like, we need to make sure the ship's going in the right direction. I trust him to do so, but just, I'm a little, I don't know, spazzy about that. I like to know everything going on. And so, when we initially started the process, we didn't know what we were doing. It's like he was going, prose. He was just writing a script and having me read it. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And just drawing thumbnails as we went along. And, as we found out, that's not the way to do it, because you end up with like a 28-page story as opposed to a 22. So,
yeah,
you learn pretty quickly that's not how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Doug, I had a follow-up question, actually. When it comes to artists, what is there a degree of panel direction, shot calling that people seem to like or don't like? How detailed do your artists like their scripts? How much direction have you found they like? Is it all over the place, etc.?
I mean, obviously that'll be individual preference with each individual artist, but for the most part, it seems like almost everybody I worked with enjoys that I kind of tell them what's in the panel without giving them an exact shot or those kind of things, unless I see something. Sometimes I'm like, hey, I'm seeing, like a bird's eye view here. I think it'd be really cool if it did this. And again, I'm always like, hey, if you think that works, great. If you don't, show me up. I'm all for it. But I know there's some, I've read scripts in the past where the writers are really into like, oh, this angle and this shot. No, this is, this much of the page and those kind of things. And I really don't get into those unless I think it's important to the story. Because, the artist is kind of the director of the movie, so it's kind of like, hey, let them do what they see. So they're excited about doing it. And like I said, unless I feel like, hey, this is important, like I really want you to shoot it this way, I don't mess with it.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, Keith, and you pretty much do that. You do shot by shot, and your artists seem pretty good with it, more or less. Or have you?
Yeah.
Have you? I don't know if we've talked about this on the pod. Have you received any pushback from your direction, or everyone's just cool with it?
I don't. It's funny because I don't receive pushback, but what I get. Okay, so number one,
I know where this
I've had one. Yeah, I've had one artist that basically early on was like, just tell me what you want in these 5 pages and I'll draw it. You know, kind of similar to what you were saying, Doug, about, you know, the fight scenes, right? But what I found more is that artists that I've worked with have preferred a lot of description, so they can choose to ignore it as they want, you know, kind of in line with what Doug is saying. And so I won't get a lot of pushback, Scott, but what I will get is like, and Doug, I don't know if you do stuff like this, but for me, I write the script, I send it off into space, and then after that, art will come back to me. I don't consult the script. It's just like, does this work on its own? You know, and I go from there. So I'll see it and I'll be like, oh, this looks really cool. And then it'll come time for me to letter it. And I'll be like, wow, I had 5 panels on this page and he only drew 3.
Yeah.
You know, so that's what I'll get. I'll just get like, they did what they wanted. It works. It looks good. And now, thankfully, I am also the letterer. So it gives me a ton of flexibility to move words around and rewrite the specific, you know, dialogue as I need to.
Yeah, it's always good if, I mean, number one, that all works as long as the storytelling works. If the storytelling works, then the page doesn't work, and you know, that's the more important thing. And you know, we've mentioned it once or twice on the pod. You know, it goes back to Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo first starting to work together, where Snyder was used to a super tight script. I'm going to tell you everything, the angle, the page panel count, all of that stuff. And Capullo's like, I don't do that. Just tell me what the story is. How many pages does this part need to be? And I'm going to take care of the rest, you know? And it was a learning curve to get where they needed to be, but they got there. And, you know, obviously that Batman run is, you know, renowned for a really great run. So, you know, you learn from it.
Now that actually brings up, okay, another follow-up thing, you know, because for me, I learned, this is going to lead into a question, Doug. I learned to write scripts. You know, I'm still only a decade plus in. I feel like I'm still relative, you know, pretty new. But when I learned to write comic scripts, I picked up the Powers, like an issue of Powers, because Bendis, I think he was one of the first people I remember that was like, I'm going to drop some scripts in the back of this comic. So I remembered that. And I just cheated off a sample script in the back of some Powers comic. So, you know, that kind of brings me around like, Doug, how did you do it? Like, did you just, you know, wake up and write comic scripts? Like where was your, you know, where'd you come from? Classically trained, you know, formally trained? How did it happen for you?
I mean, I don't know if there's a classic or formal training in comics, you know, especially with the script side of things. But like for me, what I bumped into pretty early is Dark Horse for the longest time. And I think they still do, had a sample script on their website. And so I grabbed that and I learned how to, you know, kind of follow those basic tools. But then I was really good friends with the guys in Gaijin Studios. So back in those days, you know, it was like Adam Hughes and Tony Harris and Cully Hamner and Brian and, you know, Jason Pearson, a list of great guys.
Yeah, murderer's row of creators right there.
Yeah. And I would take these to them and go, hey, what do you think? And not only would I get feedback on the story, which was always super helpful, but then they go, you know, from an artist standpoint, it'd be cool if you kind of did this to the format. It made it easier for us to follow. And so when they started explaining stuff to me like that, I went, oh, let me adapt this just a little bit. So I still stay pretty true to that original Dark Horse script format, but there's little tweaks that I did to it that help the artist hopefully understand, you know, like on the top, I always put, you know, what the page number is, how many panels I'm seeing on the page, so that they kind of like immediately get a picture in their head of what I'm going for.
Yeah. Now, what's your background in writing comics in general? You said you're good friends with the Gaijin Studios back in the day. Like, how did that all come about? Where did you meet these guys? Like, tell us everything. How did you how did you get your break into comics, and where did you come from before you started comics?
Oh yeah. So there's 2 breaks into comics. So this could get a little long, but I'll tell you everything. So I love, you know, grew up loving comics, you know, huge part of my life since I was probably about 5 or 6. I was in high school, believe it or not, and Cully Hamner and I were in the same class.
Oh.
And I saw him doodling on his paper, and I realized he was drawing a comic book character. And I was like, oh, you know, back in those days, you didn't tell anybody that you did that stuff, you know. And I was like, hey, are you into comics? And so immediately we became friends. And just for fun, we started creating our own characters and kind of having fun, you know, because he needed something to practice on. And I was like, oh, you know, I love comics. I'll do some stuff. And then it dawned on me, it took me a while, it dawned on me about 6, 8 months later that I was writing comics and I was loving it. And so then I got the bug.
Mm-hmm.
So then it was just like, oh my God, this is what I want to do with my life. And so, still remain really close friends with Cully at that point. Like when Cully graduated high school, I think a year or two later, he ended up moving to Atlanta and joining Gaijin Studios. Well, then I would travel over to Atlanta all the time and just hang out with the guys. And so, then I was hanging out with nothing but artists. So whether that's good or bad, it's hard to say. But like I was hanging out with nothing but artists. But like there was a lot of talking about comics and storytelling, and we'd go see movies and spend hours, at the Denny's, just talking about how the story was delivered and shots and all those kind of things. Cully and I did pitched a creator-owned book to Malibu Comics back in the day. And this was about when I was 25. And it got accepted. They were going to do a whole series on it and all this stuff. That's when Marvel bought Malibu and shut them down.
Oh, come on.
So I had, Hank Knoltz was my editor back then, who I'm still good friends with to this day. And like, he had lined me up with several issues of Ultra Force, and I'd managed to get one out, and then Marvel closed it all down. And so that was kind of like my first break. And then it took me a while before like I was able to kind of climb back out of that hole. And Kevin Gardner and I were sitting around doing, what we all do, right? If I was running Marvel Comics, this was what I'd do. And I can't remember which one of us said it, but one of us went, we need to put up or shut up. And so we started 12 Gauge Comics. Well, at this point, I'm really good friends with Brian and Cully and Adam and all these guys. So we started off with The Ride. And that was kind of like my second go was the epiphany of, I don't need Marvel and DC's permission to make comics. I can make my own. And that was probably the smartest thing I've ever done, was like realizing like, I don't need anybody's permission to make comic books. And then it just kind of, after that, I just kept going.
Oh, that makes so much sense, because, the first time I discovered you was vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
So when vinyl came out, I think, was that 2022 that came out?
In that area, yeah.
Yeah, 2022, something like that. And what got me was Daniel Hilliard's art style. Like when you're in a comic shop, you obviously look at the art. Like especially as an artist, that's the thing for me is, do I enjoy the art? Yes, I really like this art. Let's see what the story's like. If the story's whatever, depends how much I like this art. I might just keep reading it, or I might not, And much to my surprise, I was like, this book is excellent. Like this team is awesome. I love the writing. I love the art. Like let's keep this rolling. And at the end of the books, you have like advertisement, hey, you like this book? We also did this book. And I was like, Plastic, what is this thing? And so I found back issues of Plastic. I found like the whole set. And I was just like, oh, sweet, they have it here. Okay. I pick up the set of Plastic. I'm like, I don't know which series I love better, So like it was one of those things where discovering your work and seeing those advertisements in the back of your previous work, I just kept reading more and more, and The Ride was another one. I actually had a couple of copies of The Ride because I saw Adam Hughes had done a couple of things in it, right? Like a pinup, or did he do like a partial story? It's been some time.
Covers as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense, being friends with the guys in Gaijin Studio, it makes sense that book had I was like, wow, he has a lot of big names in this book. I wonder, like, how does that get set up? And it all makes sense now. It's like, I was thinking as I was looking at it, did Image Comics set him up with these artists? How did he know these artists? And so, that kind of solved the mystery of it.
Yeah, dude, that's just years and years of going to cons. And obviously with Gaijin, I was friends with those guys like early on, when they first started the studio. So it was just one of those things over years that we stayed friends. So that one was easy. But like Tom Coker's in that book, and a couple other people. And that's just, honestly, it's just going to cons and being social and meeting new people and talking and finding the people that like click with you when you're like, oh, I like this movie. You're like, oh my God, I love that movie. It's just those conversations and kind of things where you're like, oh, well, maybe we'll work together someday. And sometimes it comes true and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, Tom Coker was another one. I was actually just talking about that recently with someone. Like, one of my favorite works of his was Max Gen 13. That was the first time I really saw his work, and I'm like, who is this guy? And around that time in the 90s, Image Comics, it's all house styles. You have the Wildstorm house style, you have that Extreme Studio house style, and Tom being in Wildstorm, and I'm like, this doesn't match, but it doesn't match beautifully. Like, I really
Yeah.
enjoy this work. And so he just had this continued evolution of his style. So it's great that you were able to meet some of these guys, through the conventions and whatnot, and able to produce that kind of work. Keith, you got any follow-up questions? Any more questions?
No. I mean, I have a few more, but we'll see if they. I mean, is this just freeform? We just going freeform?
Yeah, we're just kind of going free.
I didn't know if you had prepared lists or what you were doing, Scott.
Oh my gosh, Keith, what episode is this?
Well, yeah, that's true. We've only been working together for 3-4 years now, right?
Yeah. Do we?
Okay.
Yeah. We usually don't have prepared lists. I kind of just talk until I stop talking, and then Keith starts talking, and that's how we do it.
Yeah. Okay. Rock on. Then let's resume that format, that magic formula. Okay. So Doug, I don't know. I kind of want to ask you about, like, I see influences here, but instead of asking you about specific influences, like maybe I know what would interest me is sort of a journey, like however fast or slow, through the things that have influenced you the most, right? Like, whatever it was first, because there's a strong influence here, and I want to see when you got to that in your sort of things that you loved and things that you wanted to do when you were making your own comics.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that's I believe, good or bad, everything you've ever taken in media wise is an influence on your work. But there's several like turning points, when you're walking through life, and you're like, when you look back, you're like, okay, this was a major milestone in how I viewed storytelling. For me, probably the biggest one right out of the gate was Star Wars. Nobody had done science fiction and done it well or made money doing it before Star Wars. And so, I leave that theater as a kid going, oh my God, you can do this. Like, you're allowed to do this and it works. And so that kind of sent me on this journey of like, hey, how do you do storytelling and what's involved in all this kind of stuff? Then when I hit my teenage years, I bumped into an Uncanny X-Men in a 7-Eleven, the old school spinner racks everybody mythically talks about. And those changed my life, honestly. Like, Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men run was, to this day, will always be my favorite, because like I got so enamored with that book for, say, the next 10 years that it changed, because that was, Chris Claremont and John Byrne. And, at that time, they hit their stride, right? And it was just like unbelievable storytelling. And I'd been reading comics for a long time, but nothing like, say, the Phoenix Saga had ever come across my plate. I'm like, oh my God, I'm crying reading this comic book. So like, then, on the novel side, like I loved Alan Dean Foster growing up, and Robert Heinlein. So those were like two big influences on me growing up as far as that's concerned. Surprisingly didn't really get into the horror game until late. And then once I got into it, like I just fell in love with it. So like Alien and Aliens will always be two of my favorite movies ever. But then I bumped into stuff like The Evil Dead, and Tucker and Dale versus Evil, The Babysitter are two on Netflix that, like, I'm still this day, I'll watch every chance I get. And so then I realized, oh, wait a minute, not only can I write stories, I can get into my dark sense of humor and people think it's funny. So like then it was like, okay, let me embrace all of this. And I think that's where you kind of get this mix of my stuff where it's like, not only is there dark comedy with a lot of horror influences, but there's also an action side of it. So that like that standard, like when vinyl, I would say is when I'm talking to people at shows, I refer to it as the Justice League of Serial Killers, because like it's serial killers and it's dark comedy, but honestly, like it's almost like a superhero team.
Right.
There's action and that kind of stuff in there. So there's like this weird mix, and it was like, that's what I like reading. That's that you take all my influences and kind of stack them together. What does that look like? And so, Keith, like you're saying, like it's those like steps that like interestingly drive you towards a voice. What do you think you see that maybe I'm missing?
Okay, so I actually see a ton of noir. I was wondering where the noir was coming from. But like it is worth noting that, look, Scott talked about your comics years ago on the podcast. I think one of the comics was even his, we do a year-end favorites thing. And I think a couple of years ago, the year he discovered vinyl was the year where he made one of his favorite comics, or his favorite comic.
You were actually my writer of the year. And Daniel Hilliard was my artist of the year, and vinyl was my comic of the year. Yep.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. But Scott would hyped your stuff as horror, right? Because he would be like, what I like so much about it is that, because I love horror. So he's like, Keith, it's horror, blah, blah, blah. And he was saying it's horror, but when you look at it, it doesn't look like horror. And that's what, we both find so interesting about your books, right? Like it's grisly as all get out, right? And of course has huge elements of horror, but it doesn't look like it. It looks pretty, like the art has aside from the copious amounts of blood and violence, right? It looks like a mainstream book. And that's what that juxtaposition really works.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I mean, and we honestly try to in each book we do, we try to make sure they looked different. So, like Laura Martin, when she colored plastic for the first time, if you notice, like even the pages look dirty. Like even the texture around the borders and stuff is like a yellowy kind of like, it's like, oh, this looks like it's an old comic. And so then when we got the vinyl, Daniel and I were talking and we're like, man, nobody's really done like a Disney beautiful horror before. And so we approached Dave Stewart and Dave's like, oh, I'm in. Like, I want to color a bloody comic that's done Disney style. And then with the Plush, we're like, hey, nobody, I don't think I've ever seen neon horror. Let's call Rico, so like we got Rico in on that one. So I appreciate that you're noticing those differences, but we honestly, we tried to make them all look a little bit different and a little bit unique while still kind of staying in that, like you said, mainstream kind of path.
It's funny that you mentioned plastic and kind of like that dirtiness to it, and then you had also mentioned like Evil Dead: Army of Darkness. I do remember a couple of shots. I'm like, oh, it kind of looks like Ash from Army of Darkness. There was a little bit of that in there, I think, and I don't know if that was intentional or if it was just there, but I do remember a couple of either it was covers or just certain panels. I was like, huh. Yeah, okay, there's something there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Daniel and I both love that movie, and I think that was more of Daniel's influence than mine because I never really had like it needs to look a little bit like Bruce Campbell. But when he started drawing, he's like, dude, like I have to put some Bruce Campbell like callbacks on this. And I was like, hey, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, it definitely showed through, and it was definitely welcomed. So, as a fan. Where did you meet Daniel? Was that another convention thing? Because he's like in and from England, right?
Well, he's an Englishman that lives in Spain.
Oh, yeah. I did not know that. Okay.
So he sent in a blind submission to the 12 Gauge site, just sent it to info@12gagecomics.com. And Kevin Gardner had hired him for Gale Ann Hurd, who's in charge of Walking Dead. They did a comic book. And so Kevin gave Daniel that gig. And at one point, Kevin and Brian had seen his stuff. I hadn't seen Daniel's stuff yet, but Brian goes, have you seen Daniel's work? And I was like, no. He's like, dude, you're going to like his stuff. And then so I looked at it, reached out to Daniel, and I was like, hey, dude, loving your work. And we just started working together. And then just became a relationship where we're really close friends. We get each other's style of humor and what we're going for. And, it's somewhat rare to find an artist that's completely egoless and doesn't want to I have to put my stamp on this. They're looking to make sure your vision is our vision, not their vision or my vision. And he's one of those people. And so that's what made it really fun to work with him. It's like, hey, all we care about is making the best story we can. It doesn't he can call me and go, hey, listen, I don't like this page. What you wrote here is not working. And I'll be like, what do we need to do to fix it? I don't get hurt. I don't scream or cry. It's like, hey, what's not working? Let's figure it out together. And I can do the same thing with him.
And does that happen very often? Or do you find basically at this point in your guys' working relationship, you guys just get each other completely?
No, it happens fairly regularly on, I'd say like a 22-page issue. There'll be 3 or 4 pages. He's like, I'm not sure this one's, hitting the right note. And, and I'll do the same with him. I'm not sure this panel's conveying what you think it's conveying. And neither one of us but it comes from a point, we both know where our heart's at. So we can he knows when I'm saying, I'm not sure this panel's working the way you think it is. It's because I don't want him to fail.
Right.
I want him to succeed. So like, there's this whole, like, he knows I'm not coming at him like, oh, I want it done my way. It's no, I'm not sure this is working. Let's reimagine it and see if we can come up with something even better together. And so,
I think that really shines through, especially with, just because it was so fresh in my mind, and obviously won all of the awards in my brain and on our podcast here
The
for
Losties. It won all the
all
Losties.
the Losties,
oh,
yeah,
yeah.
vinyl, and the thing that I really enjoyed about it, and it was the balance of, number one, the beautiful art, but also the fact that your writing is not, there's not so much of it that it overwhelms you when you're taking the book in, but there's not so little that you're breezing it through it so quickly. And it's
Mhm.
just that fine balance of just right. You know what I mean? It's just like, is the porridge too hot, too cold? It's just like, no, this one's just right. There's enough dialogue there that I know exactly what's going on at all times, but not so much to the point where I feel handholded. And
Mhm.
so like just having that nice balance, it's such a hard thing to find in comics. Like I have there's particular writers that I do enjoy, but sometimes I'm like, whew, you turn the page and there's just this overwhelming amount of bubbles, and you're just like, well, this book is going to take me a while to read, and
Yeah.
so it's like, I know that they're feeling like giving the fans what they want, but then also at times you're like, you're giving me too much of what I want. like let's find the balance. So I really
Totally.
do appreciate the amount of words that you do have on the page.
And that's, I mean, that's a struggle, with every page, like, how much do I put in? How much do I not put in? Do I put any dialogue? Like, finding that balance. And it always comes down to, like, and I'll lean on Daniel on this one as well. Like, I'll write it the way I think I would want to read it, because I'm with you. I hate when I turn that page and all I see is white. I feel like at that point from a writer's perspective, you've missed the comics as a visual medium first.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, when I turn the page, I want to see art first, not my words, and so
Yeah.
I strive for that. Daniel's really good about helping me, going, oh, this might be a little bit too much, or this is too little.
Yeah.
It's funny, him being from Europe. What's really cool is, if you guys have read a lot of European comics, they don't handhold. Like, they'll do something, and it's up. They're expecting you to be smart enough to figure it out. And so Daniel's one of those guys that'll be like, I think you told him too much here. Like, let them figure it out. That's why I draw pictures.
Yeah.
They can look at the picture and figure out what's going on. You don't have to tell them. And so it's like, I love that, because that's honestly how I prefer someone tell me a story. It's like, you don't have to have a narrator lay everything out for me. I'd rather kind of like tell the story and let me figure out some of the stuff that is intuitive.
Yeah, there's a lot of that too in sorry, Keith. There's a
No,
lot
go ahead.
there's a lot of that too in Plush, where you had mentioned, like, or not write anything at all. And there's definitely, at the climax of that book, there is a lot of silent pages, with just a couple of sound effects here and there, just based off what's happening, in that final issue. I'm not going to say anything. I want the people that are discovering you to read the book, because it's excellent. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's definitely times where you just kind of sit back and let the art do, the storytelling, do all the work, the visual storytelling.
No, and what you like, it's such a good reminder about what comics are supposed to be. Because, Doug, you read novels, I read novels, like, I'm not intimidated by words on the page in a novel. Like, that's what I goddamn signed up for. But
Right.
but for comics, you do it and you're like, did I sign up to read a novel here? And it's weird the way your brain recalibrates that, because we are here for a comic. We are here for something that's meant to be equal weights, right? I mean, I think Scott McCloud talks about that a lot in his books, about it's a partnership here that we have between pictures and words, and we as creators need to make sure that we are enabling that partnership, and not having one thing outweigh the other, so and I was thinking a lot about cutting my teeth on a lot of comics in the 70s by growing up in the 80s. You then collect a lot of comics from the 70s, and even in the 80s, man, There are some times when, and Scott and I have joked about this, where like they will describe the action in the panel in a text box, and you're like, yeah, but this action's happening in the panel right now. You really don't need to explain it to me, right?
Yeah, Spider-Man is swinging through the city. It's like, yeah, I see him. He's doing it.
There he is swinging right through the city as you say that. So yeah.
I think, I mean, you look at the old Stan Lee stuff, and I mean, guys, like there'd be like 6 balloons in one panel, of a 7-panel page, and you're like, whoa, okay. I mean, I think that works for that time period and when we were younger. But I think as as obviously as the age group has aged as well, like we've become more sophisticated in the way we can consume stories. And so we're like, hey, I don't need you to tell me every time we're in New York City. I can kind of see that. Or like you said, like as Spider-Man swinging through the city, it's like, well, I can see that.
Yeah. So, and you make a good point about that too, because a lot of this is evolution, like I'll go back and read novels from the 1980s, 1970s, or dare we go even further back. But there was a period there, maybe it was like, I don't know, the 50s to the 70s, maybe, where adverbs were like, dude, you are so cool for using all those adverbs, right? Yep. Like he whispered breathlessly, or shit like that. And you're just like, but now we've grown up on that, and we all realize we can sort of carry it to the next level. So I think, to your point, there is this progression of craft that I think we do see over time in a lot of cases where, there's a modern feel to stuff. And in many cases, the modern stuff, has a lot of higher quality to it, or it just is of the time, right? Adverbs are not of the time. Describing action right now is not of the time. Maybe 100 years from now it will be, but hopefully not. Hopefully we can just keep on. Hopefully we can keep going like this.
Yeah, I think initially a lot of that was due to the creators thinking these are for children. Children are dumb. They need to know that Spider-Man is swinging through the city. So I think that's also part of the evolution, and maybe even the advent of the letters page and seeing it's like, oh, these are grown-ups reading this. It's not only for children. So they're like, okay, we don't have to dumb it down so much. We have some grown-ups reading these still. So, let's try to make it a little more accessible for them as well.
Yeah. And I mean, just continuing through the evolution, obviously we all had boy did comics grow up there in the late 80s. Yeah. They grew up a bunch, and then I think we were like, whoa.
Yeah.
Well, like,
comics got awfully dark and mature now, didn't they?
Yeah, it was danger. You get into the 90s and it's just, I think those creators took away from Batman Returns, Watchmen, those books. What they took was the violence, but it's just like, that's not necessarily the whole thing about that book. Like that wasn't what was making it so popular. It's the other things. Don't forget the other things. There's humor to it as well. Like if you look, there is humor to these books, and it was just like everyone was the Punisher for like a decade.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Doug, I had a curious of many curious questions I'm writing down here as we're talking. There's most likely there was a gap between when you said, I'm going to start writing comics, and the first time, and we all know how the progression works, right? It's I always refer to this Dave Sim rule where he talks about your first 100 pages are going to be bad. You're just not going to think that. You're going to think they're all really good as you're doing them. But along that sort of continuum, was there a point where, between saying I want to write comics, was there that point where you were like, was there that moment, and maybe you already talked about it, where you were like, this is the thing, like, this is good. I'm not saying it's winning 100 awards or Losties, the Losties are well in my future. Right. But was there that moment where you were like, I have something here?
Man, that's a tough one. Cause I mean, I think especially when you're young and you're first starting out, you're writing stories and you're like, oh, this is really good. And in hindsight, like 5 years later, you're like, oh, that was really bad. It's like, so I know that like the initial thing that we sold to Malibu actually had some legs, and I was doing some, at the time I was doing some pretty inventive character stuff there. And so I was like, when they accepted it, I was like, okay, this is, I might be onto something. Somebody understands where I'm coming from. But then there was, several years of like nothing but rejection, just constant rejection. And honestly, until plastic came along, I was trying to write for everybody else. And the big switch for me there was when Daniel, because I was like, hey, here's some ideas, and Daniel picked plastic, and he's just like the sweetest guy on the planet. And I was like, are you sure? And we were doing it, and people were telling us, we had some people going, oh my God, this is awesome. And then we had some other people going, you will never be in comics again when this comes out. Like this will ruin your career. And we did it anyway. And plastic was probably the first time I wrote entirely based on what I wanted to read. Mm-hmm. And then when it came out and it was well received, I went, oh, here's the biggest mistake I've been making since day one. Is the reason why Marvel and DC continually were rejecting my ideas is because I was trying to write to the editor. Mm-hmm. I wasn't writing the story I wanted to read. And I think stuff like Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, those came out of Frank Miller doing something like, hey, I'm going to write the Batman I want to read. And there's where I think the genius of, like, hey, your true voice is really, you need to be writing for you, mm-hmm. and find the people that enjoy the same stuff you do versus let me try to write for everybody, because that's not possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I learned. So before comics, so I've been doing comics about 13 years at this point. But before that, I was a pro wrestler for 10 years.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it was really fun. I made a nice little name for myself on the independent circuit. I was pretty well known. And, in the last year and a half, I knew I was going to retire. I knew, I started it when I was 20 years old. I stopped when I was 30. And so when I was about 28 and a half, I was like, I know I'm done. Like, I feel like I'm done. And I almost stopped at that time. But, my friends were like, hey, just keep it rolling. Like, go till 30, maybe you'll change your mind. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. But what happened was I just started having matches that I wanted to have. Like, instead of like, hey, I think the crowd would like this, or, like, I want to try to have the best match on the card. I wasn't necessarily wrestling for myself. I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And in that last year and a half, that's what happened. I just stopped caring what I thought anyone else wanted to see, and I just did what I wanted to do, and it had a better reception. Mm-hmm. And like, I was already pretty popular at that point, but like the way I felt about what I was doing was better. I felt better about what I was doing, and the crowd, I think, can tell that. And so, when I came into comics, it was just like, well, I don't want to work for the big two. I just want to create my own stories. I don't want to work for anyone else, because to me, that's a mistake. That was the mistake I was making in the first 8.5 years of my pro wrestling career. And, at the end, I was like, no, I just want to do stuff for me. And so I kind of came in with that perspective. So yeah, it's really powerful when you're working for yourself. And, something Keith and I talked about on the pod previously is don't chase trends. Like if you're trying to chase a trend, by the time you put your book out, that trend's over, and what do you have? You potentially have a piece of work that you don't believe in, and no one wants to read anyway. And so what did you just do for the last how many months of your life,
Right. No, you're dead on, dude. I mean, I can't agree more with you. Like, I mean, I do get a lot of Hollywood meetings, and it's funny, even to this day, and this is part of it will be new, but like, you'll recognize the old part. Like, everybody asks, do you have anything like John Wick? And you're like, well, John Wick's done. Like, I mean, I'm not saying John Wick is the character or whatever, but I was like, John Wick's been done. You're not going to duplicate that. And if you do, it's going to be a poor man's version of it. And now it's everybody's like, well, do you have anything like John Wick or Jack Reacher, the TV show? And you're like, well, again, like, Reacher has been done. Like, and right. So I'm with you. Like, if you start trying to chase trends or what you think is going to be popular versus writing something that you would love to read, you're always going to fall short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Keanu Reeves is like, guess what? I'm making a comic book.
Yeah.
I'm coming for you bastards now.
Yeah. By the way, I'll just do a Kickstarter, make a couple mil. Okay.
No big deal. No big deal.
Yeah. So Doug, you mentioned something interesting I wanted to hook into possibly which is just a first quick question. You just mentioned like in terms of timeline, you said there was a period where you had nothing but rejections. How long was that time period?
Well, let's see. I mean, I started trying to pitch stuff to Marvel and DC back when I was like 17. And so there was 17 to 25, and it was 25 to 32.
Okay.
So, when, a lot of times I'll get, say somebody that's 17 or 18 will come up and go, oh, I want to be a writer or an artist. What's the one piece of advice you would give me? And I go, get 100 rejection letters as quickly as you possibly can.
Okay.
And they're like, what? And I'm like, I'm telling you, like, it's coming. It's unavoidable. But the sooner you get those out of your way, the faster you'll grow, and the faster you'll get to your path. But if you're sitting there trying to make because of the thing I ran into was I would spend months writing my one-shot flash story because it had to be perfect. And then I'd send it in and get a rejection letter and go, well, I just spent 4 months on this. Like, and I'm like, no, just keep cranking them out. Because like, if you keep cranking them out, you'll learn so much from just actually doing it. That those rejection letters pile up so quickly. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen the same things. I mean, what Jim Lee was like over 700 rejection letters.
Yeah,
before
Todd
he got
McFarlane.
accepted. Yeah.
Stephen King talked about in On Writing, he had the thumb the nail above his bed, and he would just slap the rejection forms, and then he would have to like take inches of rejection letters off the nail, throw them away, or put them in a box or something and keep going, right? So like, look, you have an amazing attitude toward rejection, Doug. Like, how did you keep going though? I mean, that's a ton of rejections to go through. Like, you're saying that now, but like, it sounds like you had some kind of awareness of that before. Like it feels like you've always had a strong tolerance for rejections. And I think that's something, am I right on that? Like, how'd you keep going? Was it easy? Was it hard? Did you have moments?
It was hard. I mean, earlier in my career, like, I mean, I took rejection pretty hard but then I've got this really weird hard-headed streak. And I was like, no, I want to write comics and I'm going to do this no matter what it takes. And so it was just that consistent, like, yes, I would, it would sting and it would hurt. I mean, nowadays it's no big deal. Cause like, like I'm sure Jim and Tom would say the same, like when you get the past 200, you're like, and then you learn, like, you just go, well, who am I pitching to next? It's not necessarily like, oh my God, I can't believe they turned me down. It's like, no, that's a check mark off your list of like, okay, who's number 2? And you just keep going.
It feels like that when we're working shows, look, you're more of a name. So, but like for us, it's like, hey, we're stopping every Tom, Dick, and Harry that's walking by our table saying, hey, hey, this is our book. This is our book. Oh, that's okay. And like when you first start doing that, it hurts. It hurts your feelings, and you're like, oh man, okay. And then you're kind of like reluctant to talk to the next person. We've been doing this for so long now. You get a rejection and you just kind of move on from it. You're like, okay, well, hey, who actually wants to read my story?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, and cons are great. I've had a couple of friends that were starting out and, they set up a table and did cons. And then I've had a couple of friends that have done one con and they're like, I can't take that kind of rejection. I'm like, oh, that's easy. The face-to-face real quick, like somebody walking by and going, and you're like, hey, here's my story. And they're like, I'm not into that. And you're like, okay. And you move on to the next one. That's like level 0, right? Like that's that's the easy part.
It's like getting 100 rejection letters like in an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine, like you get a rejection letter from an editor and they're like, you suck.
Yeah. I totally like stories, but what I don't like is yours.
Yes, exactly. It's like, oh, I love everything Spider-Man except your version.
Yeah.
It's,
why was he crying the whole episode?
One of my favorite stories about that was like I had written, and this was back when Dark Horse owned the rights to Predator and Alien, and I had written this like little 8-page story that was supposed to be in Dark Horse Presents, which was Alien versus Predator, and I thought it was genius. And so I sent in the script. They sent me a rejection letter. I go, they clearly didn't read this. It's amazing. Send it back in, rejection letter. Send it in a third time. I get a rejection letter from the CEO of Dark Horse going, man, do not send this in again. And I was like, okay, I guess I won't, but like I was just convinced, like I was like, clearly they didn't read this. Like I'm sending it back to them. Like this rejection letter is wrong.
They're just throwing money away.
Yeah, I get it. See, I mean,
I,
some people can handle it and some people can't. I mean, I
yeah, yeah.
still struggle with reading reviews. So I tend to have it, I tend to like shy away from them. I got Doug Dabbs who did Klik Klik Boom. He reads every review on the planet. Like he good or bad, he doesn't care. Every review that I read, if it's not a 10 out of 10, it stings a little bit. I'm like, I dropped the ball on this. So, there's different levels of rejection, right? I can handle a rejection letter from editor, but like a bad review hurts my feelings still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. And then you kind of talk yourself into like, well, I remember one time, so Scott has a previous career in wrestling. I have a prior career in music. I rhymed for a while, and then I was in a funk band for a while. And so, boy, I definitely cut my teeth on some hard rejections there. But then somebody told me, once you're out in the public, somebody told me this, and like, damn it, if it didn't come true in a lot of cases, it's like, it is the old adage of like, say whatever you want to say, just spell my name right. Because in the end, people generally only remember that they read about you. They don't remember whether the review was good or bad. They just remember that they read about you, So it is pretty interesting the way that builds over time, no matter how hard those. That's what I told myself after a couple like scathing reviews way back in the day on the music side, right? And then after that, you're like, whatever. It all works. Just spell my name right.
And that could also, I mean, like that's the whole thing with, there's no such thing as bad press. Even if they did remember how shit the review was of you, it might lead them to go, I want to see how bad it is. And they listen to your band or they read your book and they go, what's that guy talking about? Like, this is pretty good, and then potentially you have a new fan just based off of that advertisement, the rejection. But Doug, I get your point about the difference between getting a rejection from an editor as opposed to a fan who's written a review. Like I get it. I understand that. It's just like, well, maybe the editor is into a certain thing, and when they read this isn't their thing. So they gave it the review they gave it because they don't like that stuff. But a fan more than likely read your book because, oh, hey, I'm into, dark humor, I'm into dark horror or comedic horror. I'm going to read this book. And then when you read that book and it they don't get the book, or they don't give you the review you're looking for, it definitely hurts more. You had mentioned Klik Klik Boom, and that's one of your more recent projects. So how did you find your artist on that? How'd you find?
Again, they're always like long stories, but Doug Dabbs actually went to SCAD in Atlanta. And at that time I was I was in the Gaijin studios and we had interns. And so SCAD sent him over and he was an intern for a while.
Oh, wow.
He went his way, obviously, things, your paths drift apart. And we were doing the ride Burning Desire. And the person that was supposed to do the last backup story in that he had some stuff come up and couldn't do it. And so I was like, man, just kind of looking through the Rolodex, and I bumped into Doug Dabbs and I was like, I haven't heard from him for a while. Like, I wonder if he'd even be interested in doing this. And so reached out, he did it. It turned out great. And I was like, hey, do you want to do something else? And so kind of pitched, what I typically do is pitch, a new artist that I'm working with on something that's created on like 4 or 5 ideas. He picked Klik Klik Boom and we just went from there, and it was just like one of those like magical, like, hey, we knew each other from like 10 years ago and it's come full circle to where we're working together again. And again, I mean, finding artists and writers, I think is just blind luck.
What was the inspiration for Klik Klik Boom? Like, it's such a interesting story. Like, reading it definitely reads like a movie. Like, and that's something else I like about your writing. It's very cinematic. Like, I'm like, I could see this in the theater, like whether it be vinyl, plush, plastic, Klik Klik Boom. It feels like a movie when I'm reading it. Now, are you like where does that come from? Like exactly. And where did the story of Klik Klik Boom, like what's the origin of that? How did that pop into your head?
Klik Klik Boom was just one of those. I mean, guys, the muses talk to you in all kinds of different shapes and sizes and different speeds, right? Like, with plastic, I was on a road trip and I went past, I was with Brian Stelfreeze and Eric Layton, and we're driving to Baltimore from Atlanta. And as you cross the state line into Virginia, they don't have welcome to Virginia signs. It says buckle up Virginia. which if you've read Plastic is the last line in the book. And the entire idea came to my head, the whole thing. Klik Klik Boom all came. I was walking through San Diego and I saw this picture of a lady laying on a bed in a hotel room surrounded by Polaroids. And you couldn't tell if she was alive or dead.
Where did you see that? Where did you see that image?
That was in San Diego Comic-Con.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so, I'm like, that's an interesting there's something there. Like, why would, in this day and age, would somebody have so many Polaroids, and is she dead, alive? What does that mean? And so from that point on, I just kind of like started going, well, I mean, maybe that's the only way she can communicate, and so that's where it kind of developed from there. The cinematic side, I mean, honestly, it's, I mean, I love visual based media. So like TV, film, games, all that stuff. And so all of that's an influence on me, but I want to try to deliver. I don't write for film, like I don't try to like go, hey, Klik Klik Boom. I'm writing Klik Klik Boom, hoping it gets optioned. That's never in my head. I write comic books.
No, I hope that's not a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
It's each issue feels like a solid issue. It has a nice little cliffhanger. It makes me want to read the next, but it definitely doesn't feel like he's trying to make a buck in Hollywood. It definitely feels like a comic book, and it was made for comics, but the overall vibe of it definitely feels like I could see this in the theaters for sure.
Yeah. And I'm glad that comes, and I'm glad it gets translated that way. And I think, obviously that's just as much Doug Dabbs' influence it is mine. And, it's like, hey, how can we deliver this in a very cinematic visual way, especially when you're dealing with a character who doesn't talk? That's where you have to really focus on the visuals, because you have to tell the story through the visual medium and through the panels. And so I think that's probably what that one had more influence of that than, how do we deal with a deaf, or a mute main character and deliver this? You have to be a lot more cinematic, I think.
Yeah, I think I would have had the follow-up question if you seek out artists based on the story, and the fact that Doug picked that story specifically, he had to have known that he has great artistic chops to deliver that, because like you said, the character is mute. So there was a lot of visual acting, face acting, body language acting. And that's, for every artist, that's not their cup of tea per se. So yeah, that would have been my follow-up question if you hadn't said, hey, here's some options. Which one do you like? But, I think artists tend to gravitate towards scripts that they feel connected to, or that they could actually pull off. So that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's funny because when I initially came up with, especially Plastic and Klik Klik Boom, those styles are not the styles that I saw in my head. Like Daniel was not, I did not see like a kind of like more, more on the animated cartoon style side of violence. I was seeing like a more realistic, which I don't think would have worked as well.
Right.
In hindsight, you're like, oh no, this was perfect. Cause like Daniel's stuff has a dark comedy feel to it automatically. And, same with Doug Dabbs is like, I was like, oh, I was kind of that one. I was picturing more animated, and more fluid and organic. And so when Doug started turning his stuff, I was like, oh, this isn't what I pictured when I came up with it initially, but like, this is better. So it's, blind luck.
Yeah, I was wondering myself, because I'm just so used to you and Daniel Hilliard being a team for everything. I was just like, how come you didn't use Daniel for this? And like, because I'm a huge fan of him, because he definitely has, and like, I don't know if it's intentional or what, but he has a very strong Ryan Otley vibe, which I love Invincible. So I think when I flipped through the book initially, I was like, this dude draws like, Ryan Otley. It's like slightly more cartoony, but like, I was like, I really like this. And he definitely leans into the cartooning aspect of it a little more than Ryan does. But, like you said with Plastic, I don't think I could see it any other way. Like, I think, looking at it, I'm like, this is what it's supposed to look like. Like you read a book, and after a while, like, I can't really think of a book in particular that I started reading, but I know it's happened where I'm like, I don't know if I like this art style. And then as I'm reading the story, I'm like, oh, I can't see this looking like I don't know that another artist could pull this off the way this is going on right now. So, yeah, with Klik Klik Boom, initially it was just kind of like, I'm used to Daniel, who's this guy? and I was like, this is really good. I really like this art, and I really like the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those, Daniel and I talk about this all the time. We have so many things in the cupboard, and it's like, how can we get stuff out faster? And it's, he can only draw so fast, and I can only write so fast. And it's just one of those deals to where, like, hey, do you mind if I go work on Doug with this? And he was like, oh yeah, of course. You got to get as many books out as we can. And
yeah, that was another follow-up. You keep beating me to the punch on these things because I was
damn
gonna
you,
ask
Doug Wagner. Yeah.
You're too good at everything. I was going to ask you, like, do you have a bunch of stuff down the pipeline? Are you running out of ideas? Because from what I've read of your work, they're mostly miniseries or shorts. So it's kind of like, while you're burning through these ideas, are you thinking about revisiting some of these characters, the ones that moved on from each individual story? Are you trying to build a larger world? Is your world connected? What's going on in the Doug Wagner verse here?
It's a kind of an interesting mix. What I think manga has over current American comics is that I know where to start with manga and I know where to end with manga. You start with issue, or book, whatever they call them, volume 1, volume 2, like there's not all these crazy spin-offs. I don't have to read this book to understand this book. I love that part of manga. And so Daniel and I started off pretty early about going, especially when we got to vinyl, is like, is this going to be a continuation of Plastic, even though it's in the same universe, or do we want it to be a standalone? And so it became very important to us that everything we did, that's not, hopefully maybe someday we do an ongoing, but like at this point, like everything we want to do, even if it's in the same universe, we don't want you to have to have read Plastic to understand Plush. Mm-hmm. It might embellish or make it more entertaining if you have, but you don't have to read one to understand the other. And so we want to keep kind of doing that. Like everything's a current, if we do miniseries, it's going to be standalone for the most part. We've got one that isn't. But yeah, that's important to us. And we've got so many ideas. So like we're not close to running out. It's like, when you're doing, 1 or 2 a year and you've got 20, you're like, okay, I'm good for at least 10 years. And you're going to come up with more along the way. So, it's like, I mean, we fantasize sometimes from doing ongoings, but like ongoings are so tough to make work in the indie market.
Yeah.
And is that something that
you beat me to that, actually? Yeah, I was just going to say you beat me to that, which is I just wonder, the Japanese comic market, for whatever reason, does support continuing to go and go and go and go and go, where like the American comic market, I mean, it's, I've changed the way I do one of my books. I basically have an ongoing series that I ended up, instead of doing say 18, 20 issues, I did it in volumes. Mm-hmm. And that was just sort of at direction of the publisher, which, I'm now part of. But it's to your point, it's like short doses, because somewhere in the American comic market, somewhere shared among retailers, fans, whoever, although I'm not sure if it's fans anymore, because fans seem to like manga plenty and they're on, volume 38 of whatever manga they're reading. But there's some kind of pressure somewhere, to your point, to have like limited series, tell a story, beginning, middle, end, be done. And then don't worry about creating some long ongoing series, So it is interesting to kind of think that through. And it's almost like I kind of feel like, to your point, Doug, it's like a necessity of the American market almost to tell your stories in short doses. Doesn't mean you have to, but it means that, through Diamond, through publishers, through people like that, you're generally going to get that level of, I don't want to say pressure, but you're going to get sort of persuaded to do those kind of stories.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, now we're getting into business, right? And so like, it's an interesting, I think there's a generation that clearly loves manga and is and I love manga. So I'm one of those, there's some of us that go, cross both paths, but like in the American retailer direct market, that same model and those same fans don't exist. And I don't know if there's a way, I'm not smart enough to figure out a way to get those two to come together, but clearly the manga market has like Gen Z in the palm of their hand, and they're just like you said, it's 20 years worth of work, and they just keep going. But it is easier. It's very accessible. Like I said, it's like Naruto doesn't have spin-offs and all that, and it doesn't cross over into Bleach. It's Naruto, and here's all the volumes, and that's all you will ever need to understand the story. And I think with the direct market, it's the next generation or the older generation, and they're like, yeah, I'm not buying any more ongoings. I'm getting enough already. And so I think, especially for guys that are doing indie books, you guys understand how the market works. Usually, when you get to issue 5 or 6, even with Image books, you're lucky if you're breaking even again. Like, you make all your money on the front end, and by the time you're to issue 5 or 6, like, you're like, well, I mean, at least it paid for itself. And so, to try to do an ongoing and guys, how many can you name? How many ongoing indie books can you name that are successful? Saga, obviously, Walking Dead for years, and Invincible.
Yeah, you had Chew, you had Invincible. And there's certain ones that are kind of like legacy, but like I still think they're bad at, like Savage Dragon. Like I talk about it on the podcast all the time. Like I've been doing catch up on that, and like the stuff from 2000 to 2009. That's basically kind of where I am in the reading with it. It's like, it's fantastic. I was like, this book is so good, but it's so few and far between. To follow up on that a bit, is there like direction from Image Comics, kind of like, hey, we're not really looking for ongoing series right now, or are they just kind of open-ended? It seems like you have a good relationship with them, and I think maybe they would trust you to do an ongoing, or is it kind of a decree like, hey, we're not really doing so many of those right now?
They don't really give you a decree as much as, like, Eric Stevenson, I've been working with him for years now, and he's always fantastic. Even today we were exchanging some emails about stuff and just clarifying strategies and stuff. And he'll just come out and tell you. He's like, listen, here's what we've seen. You can try to do an ongoing, but by issue 5, if you're down to 0, as far as making money, what are you going to do? Like, what's your plan past that? Because, like, it's going to be really difficult to rebound from that. You don't ever see anybody really go down under 0 and then come back up. It's very rare. Yeah. And so I think he wouldn't necessarily tell me no, but at the same time, I think you might want to be cautious. Because, you've seen it. Image, there's books that try it. IDW, Dark Horse, all of them try it from time to time. And like 1 in 50 make it? And you kind of see them just go, oh, we got to issue 5 and just stopped. So it's an unfortunate. It's just how the direct market here works. But I think there's never been any, like, Eric's like, oh no, we're not doing an ongoing with you. It's just like, you can, but just be prepared. Like,
the financial aspect is primarily on you, more or less, right?
Yeah.
So, like, okay, so that's a question, I guess. If you were breaking even by issue 5. And it's basically like, okay, and I don't know exactly how Image works. Is it they take their nut first and then you get what you get afterwards? Like, because they put X amount in on the front end to publish the books and stuff like that. Do they take their percentage off the front end of it and then you get anything afterwards? So if let's say you're at 0 profit, have they already taken their money back, so they're willing to go, hey, you're just going to keep not making money on this, but we're taking what we take? Like, is that okay?
With Image, which, I love their model, but it does put a lot of the onus on the creator. So, like, they basically charge you $2,500 per issue. Okay. And that includes, like, they'll handle the production, they'll handle solicitations, they help you find, they'll handle the printing and that kind of stuff. But they have that flat fee. But you own it outright. It's all yours, and you get every penny of profit past, obviously their cost, or the $2,500 for the fee, and then the printing and shipping costs. And they share all that with you. They're completely transparent. And so, like, past that, you get all the money. But yes, they get $2,500 no matter what.
Okay.
So, like, it's like, okay, this is technically still creator-owned comics. Like, they don't give me any money to produce comics. It's like, so, like,
they're not asking for any piece of your property, right? No. Like, all that checks out. Yeah.
Yeah. But they do get 20% of the profits on trades.
Okay.
Yeah, I did hear that.
Yeah.
And that's what I hear a lot of the creators make their money too, is the trades.
Oh yeah. I mean, still to this day, every 6 months I get a check for plastic.
That's awesome.
Mm.
So, it's kind of like that, like, hey, I did it, 8 or 10 years ago, and I'm still getting a check, and even if it was only $100, I'd be like, hey, I didn't have to work for it this 6 months.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, you got paid for something you finished a long time ago.
Right.
And, and that's something I talk about with some of my indie creator friends. Like, we'll have conversations. One of my studio mates, she was talking about, like, financially, I just can't work on my own books right now. I need to take all the commissions I can. It just doesn't make sense for me to work on my own books because I'm not getting paid. And I go, look, not for nothing, you may not be getting paid right now to do it, but once that book is printed, it exists forever. You can continue to have that book printed and you'll keep making money off of it. You can do it, and 10 years down the line, you're still making money off of that book, and you've already done that work. And that's where the payday really comes off. And not only that, not everything finds its audience straight away.
No.
Like, I found plastic years after it was done, and you created a lifelong fan base off of, like vinyl and then plastic and so on. So, you might not find your audience when you make that product, but it just might not be in vogue at that time, and that's something else I wanted to, I relate to her, was people might find this later on, and like, that's the thing that's in, and you created it before it was in. And then that's the thing that you can sell, and you can make good money off of it. So it's just, don't be so short-sighted when it comes to making comic books. It's not necessarily all about right now. It's like, you got to think about the future with that product.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know, like, even with something as successful as Walking Dead and Invincible, both of those books got, like, Eric was like, this book needs to stop. It's losing money. You need to cancel it. And Robert Kirkman was like, oh no, I'll get a second job before I cancel my book. And so, you're talking about something like Walking Dead that was almost canceled a couple of times over those years of like, oh my God, like, it wasn't selling enough at that point to keep it going. Now look at it. You're like, Invincible is the same way. It's like, Ryan's from Salt Lake, which I live outside Salt Lake. And, talking.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that. I knew you
Mhm.
lived in Utah. I knew that for sure. We talked about it at Amazing Con. But yeah, I didn't know Ryan. Is he still there? Is he still in?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is. I hadn't seen him in a
okay.
couple months, but yeah, last time I checked, he was still in Salt Lake City. And he was telling me, like, hey, there was a couple of times where we didn't know if this book was going to make it the next month. And now, like, he just like, no, we're going to stick with it, and we're going to keep hammering away. And everybody on that team was willing to sacrifice to keep it going. And
yeah, I remember they pushed that story, the reveal, the Omni-Man reveal. They pushed that up, I think, 10 to 20 issues. Like, it was supposed to happen, I think, in issue 25. And then it ended up happening in issue like 10 or 13 or something along the lines because of that very reason. I think Valentino was the one in charge at the time, and he said, you need to do something or this book's not going to make it. And Robert said, well, look, this is the big reveal. He goes, you need to do that now.
yeah,
and because you might not see 25. And so they did it. And that, I think that actually gave the property some legs. It was just like, wait, what? And so fans are like, well, I got to see what's next.
Yeah, so I'm with you on that. I mean, and those are two, obvious, easy case in points of like, hey, sometimes you got to suffer through the, I'm not saying, like, don't eat. At the same time, like, how can
there's a line.
Yeah, how can I keep working on my book and keep it coming out regularly? And what's the, like, Robert told me he was working like a third shift job at a warehouse, during the Walking Dead and Invincible stuff, and Ryan told me, like, at the beginning of Invincible, when Robert hired him, he was married with a new baby, and they moved into his parents' house because he's like, I know I'm not going to be making any money. So, I always hate to show those examples, but at the same time, I like to point out, like, what are you willing to sacrifice to continue the dream? Like,
yeah. There's the Kevin Smith adage, I think, where he sold his entire comic book collection, I think, to finance the first Clerks. Right. So, I mean, and to your point, examples up and down, up and down.
Yeah. Definitely.
So Doug, I know we've been running on here for a little bit. I don't know if Scott had anything else, but I know for me, something I'm kind of curious on, like, what are you reading right now? What are you watching right now? Like, what's sort of filling your brain that you like? It doesn't even have to be something that's, you know, you're doing it with the idea of it influencing you, but like, what are you liking these days?
Yeah, I mean, and I've kind of steered more towards indie books. So like I'm in a mix of like what I can pick up at the retailer and as well as like Kickstarters. So
Mhm.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
trying to think like recently I picked up like Jeff Parker's new one. I think it's Blither. Um, and then dude, I try a bunch of different stuff. And so like what's the one I got in? I got something in the mail the other day that I really enjoyed. And it was like from a Kickstarter. And this was
The
like the House
House of Loather.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I like
And
that.
it's
Yeah,
like
it
all
looks
black and
cool.
white, you know, just a gorgeous looking book, hardcover. So, you know, I mean, I bump into stuff here and there. Finally got around to getting Apple TV so I can watch Ted Lasso, and I'm absolutely devouring that, loving that.
Mm.
And then being a science fiction nerd, I've started watching The Foundation. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's based on Isaac Asimov's books.
I have
And so
not.
kind of devouring that.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah. In fact, my brother-in-law recommended it to me. I've read a lot of sci-fi, but never the Asimov Foundation stuff. So I've heard great things about it.
Going
Yeah. So,
back to Kickstarter real quick. So I did back Narco.
oh, thanks.
Yeah. So what was the decision to use Kickstarter instead of maybe going through Image for that book?
Honestly, it was just like we kind of got I know this sounds crazy, but we just got a hankering to like try a Kickstarter. I know it sounds crazy, but
Mm.
like I know Kevin Gardner at 12 Gauge just desperately has always wanted a hardcover plastic. And so it's funny that you mentioned that because I just got them in the other day. Kevin sent them to me to kind of so like the Narco, you know, there's a trade paperback of Narco,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the hardcover, which I love both covers on those.
Yeah, that's the one I got. I got the the twofer. I got the hard plastic and the hard Narco cover.
I didn't know the plastic was going to be oversized.
That's dope.
Sprung that on me.
Yeah.
So, so it's one of those things where we kind of wanted to experiment and see if there was a way to like get some funding for a book versus the classic, you know, direct market, and just to try to try out Kickstarter and see how it helped. You know, we did one with Thomas River, which Brian Stelfreeze and I did, which is just the first issue of that series, just to see like, is this a viable option?
Mm-hmm.
It totally is. I mean, like you said, you're backing Kickstarter, so you think getting a hankering for it obviously makes sense. It's just like if you're picking up books from that distribution, you know, it's just like, why don't we try it? And like a ton of companies use it. Boom, IDW, and like to me, when companies use it, it's a little outside of my exception, I guess. Like I'm just like,
Yeah.
come on, guys, you guys are big comic companies. Why are you here? Like you shouldn't be here. But when like creators like yourself use it, I love it. I think it's a great thing. And you know what I've seen other creators do, which is like I have zero problems from. They double dip. They'll go like, hey, I'm running a Kickstarter to get this book. You'll get exclusive stuff from it. And what that helps with is potentially the financial aspect for the creators. You know, like your artist, you know, yourself, you guys can get paid, and then you can and then the audience gets exclusive content. You get an exclusive cover, you get whatever, something exclusive, and you can kind of go like, hey, I helped kind of get this over the finish line, or I was part of the process of this, and I have something that regular fans at the local comic shop won't get when they put this through Diamond and then you know have it sent out that way. You know, like I got Sean Gordon Murphy's Plot Holes.
Yes.
And that was excellent. I loved it so much. And so now it's being put out through Massive with single issues. I still pick up the single issues. I'm a single issue collector. It's like, yeah, I have a hardcover. I have like this giant oversized 11 by 17 black and white version of it. And I'm like, yeah, I got all this exclusive stuff and I've read the story, but it doesn't stop me from going like, hey, they have new covers out for the single issues, and I love single issues, so I'm going to get that too, you know. So I don't find any fault with it, and I think it works really well. And so I'm looking forward to Narco as soon as it comes in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I just got mine in. I think it was Friday, so yours should be pretty quickly coming in.
Yeah, a couple of weeks. Yeah, hey, I'm a patient person. I'm not worried about it. I don't feel like I'm getting stiffed or anything. So, like, you know,
that one took a little bit longer than we were expecting. Like that, I think Narco was the first one we tried where the book wasn't completely done beforehand. And I'm a creative, so you know I'm going to throw us under the bus. When you tell us we don't have a deadline, we're not the best people at getting things done. So, so that was the first one where we're like, oh, we got all the money we need, but there's no hard deadline, so I don't have to turn it in on time.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so it took us a lot longer than I thought it would take us. But lesson learned, right? From now on until it's done, I'm not doing a Kickstarter, so I can I want to be able to ship that thing to people within 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, that's kind of my deal too when I do Kickstarters, because I've experienced that where there was this one creator. It was like a Peter Pan book, and it looked amazing. I was like, this looks so good, and I was like pimping it on all my social media. I was telling everyone they should back this Kickstarter before it ends, and the book didn't come out. It had a release date for a year after the Kickstarter, which is fine. They were upfront about it. It's going to take a year. I'm like, it's a graphic novel. Of course, it's going to take a year to draw. Makes sense. It didn't come out for 3 years after that deadline. So I got it, year 4.5. It finally came through. And for me, that was a lesson. Like, don't do a Kickstarter unless your book is done, So I had it as on the fan end experiencing, the lack of the book showing up. And so for me, when I do my Kickstarters, I always make sure in the concern section of it, I always go like, the book is drawn, it is colored, I am currently lettering it. It's going to be done. It is 95% going to show up exactly when I tell you, unless there's an issue with the printer. It's like something that's not under my control. Like, that will be the problem. It's not going to be me.
Yep.
Comics are hard. It's hard to make a living in comics. Especially if you're not working for, say, Marvel and DC and write 6 or 7 of their books. Kickstarter's just one of those other avenues of even and we did pretty decent on Narco as far as the Kickstarter was concerned. But honestly, most of that money went to either the talent or printing bill. And so for me personally, I didn't make a penny off the Narco Kickstarter. All my money will come from the sales of the books after Kickstarter. So, but it was a way for me to go, hey, let me make sure Daniel and Dave are getting paid.
Yep.
It's just an avenue. And again, it's not a ton of money, but hey, when you're in comics and doing it independent, create your own stuff, you need every cent you can grab.
Yeah.
Now, when you're normally working with them, since you all are in creator-owned spaces, are you like, since you're working collaboratively, like you guys own these things 50-50, are you paying these guys like from your own pocket, or are you guys just like, we're getting paid after the fact? Me and my writer, we're kind of the same thing. It's just kind of like, when we do the Kickstarters, if there's money left over, we get paid,
Right.
and so
for the most
your
part,
guys' process?
I'm usually the only person that's completely working for free up front. So Daniel gets a page rate, but it's not like it's not like a Marvel or DC page rate, because he understands, hey, this is a creator own thing. But like, if you're hiring somebody like Dave Stewart or Rico Renze to like color your book, they could be color Marvel or DC instead, easy.
Yeah.
So they get paid.
True.
So
same with my colorist. My colorist is always paid.
Yeah.
And I'm the artist, so I'm the one that costs the most. But since they're my titles, like I'm just like, whatever, it's what it is. But I was always curious about how that works on, like the scale of Image Comics, and and I guess it would be more of a case by case situation. And so I was always curious about that.
Yeah.
Well, and with Beware the Eye of Odin. So both Tim Odlin and I did it completely for free. But when it came time to like color and letter and that kind of stuff, like I was like, man, I kind of got this stuff going on with Daniel, and Klik Klik Boom's in the middle of something. Like, I don't have the money right now. Luckily, Eric at Image loved it so much. So he's like, well, how about we cover that? We'll pay the colorist and the letterer. So this was a different situation. But at the same time, he's like, but that money comes back to us before you guys get any money. That's fair, right? I mean, they're putting the money up front, so
that's
to me,
a great deal.
I'm like, that's perfectly acceptable. So to get the book out was fantastic, so like he gave us the money to get it colored and lettered. But again, they took the money out right out of the gate when the issues came out, and they were very fair with all of that. So
that 100% makes sense. And hey, no money coming out of your bank account
sounds
great. I mean,
pretty good with that.
It's interesting too, Doug, because you're kind of the more creators I talk to, the more I realize that like there's something about, and maybe this is across all formats, I don't know, but it feels like in comics, there's just this compulsive thing of like, but I need to get the book out. right? And so like bravo to you for that. And like I can relate to, at some point there's just this thing that's like, you know what, yeah, I won't get paid up front. I'll get paid later. I need to see the book out. The book has to be put out. So, you know, I applaud it. And, you know, like it puts cool stuff in the world, and then you trust yourself on the back end, right? It's great.
Well, I think
it's also almost like a pathology that we have, right, as comic creators.
Well, I think one of the interesting parts about that too is, like, I don't know about you, and I'd be interested to, like, it makes me think really hard about the project I'm working on too. Like, if I know I'm doing it for free and that the only way I get paid is if this is good enough for people to buy it. Like, I put, you know, it sounds weird, but like you work on it harder than even if you were getting paid to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I like high degree of difficulty. You know, I'm going to invoke this great analogy, I think, that Stephen King talked about in the Bachman books, right? Which is like, he wrote under Richard Bachman as a pseudonym way back in the day, but he wanted to write on it again in a lot of ways to, like, it's almost like he wanted to prove to himself that he was a being of pure craft, as opposed to a name of Stephen King. Like he wanted to make things harder for himself, you know? So it's like, I think I can relate to that, Doug. And, you know, like, to your point, it's like, I like placing gambles on myself. I like betting on myself and doing everything I can to, you know, force the best possible product out there. And if that means putting more pressure on yourself, then so be it.
Yeah.
The Tim Odland. So Beware the Eye of Odin. How did you find him? Because this felt like another book where, much like Klik Klik Boom, it was like, oh, this is the artist that's supposed to draw this story. Like, the art is very different, like a very different aesthetic from your other books. It's a different story than your other books. Where did you find him?
Tim, believe it, I mean, this could all come full circle to Ryan Otley. So when I first moved to Salt Lake City, I reached out to Ryan and I was like, hey, I'm in Salt Lake City now. Like, I'd love to get together. And he goes, hey, we have a drink and draw every Thursday night. You should come. So I went down, met the guys. One of them was Tim. And, you know, just talking to Tim back and forth, we realized, like, we lived like 5 minutes from each other. And I was like, hey, why don't we start carpooling? And so we started carpooling to drink and draw every Thursday night and became pretty good friends. And then we started going to lunch. I always call this a Taco Bell book, because we started going to lunch every Wednesday to Taco Bell. Every Wednesday for lunch, we met. And, you know, we talked comics and movies and, you know, all the stuff we loved. And then he goes, you know, hey, would you ever consider writing something for me? And I was like, dude, I love your work. Let's do it. And I was like, what do you want to draw? And he goes, I want to draw trolls fighting Vikings. I was like, let's go. And then we kept meeting for, like, you know, because it's like 2 or 3 years to do it. Because again, we did it completely for free, but like we met every Wednesday at Taco Bell for like 3 straight years, going over scripts and layouts and pages and all those kind of things. And that's, I mean, you know, it's just like, again, like we were talking about with Doug Dabbs and Daniel, it's just, dude, it's just happy coincidence that you bump into somebody. You know, you leave the house to go to a drink and draw where you know nobody. And you bump into this guy who you end up being like really tight friends with for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Funny. Like, a couple of things. One, it makes sense why it feels like this is the book that he's supposed to draw, because this is the thing he wants to draw. You know, same with Klik Klik Boom. You know, it's like they're picking the stories that they want to do, and it very much feels that way. I just read the first issue. My shop did not have issue 2, and I have the rest of the issues. So I have to finish the story. But I have to find issue 2 first. So,
dude, you got my info. So, like, I've got them. If you let me know if you need one.
Oh, right on, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed it. I'm not a you know, swords and trolls type of guy. Like, that's not really my thing. I love capes. I love, you know, comedic horror apparently, dark, like humorous horror. Like, apparently I love that. But I saw your name on it. I was like, yeah, let me check this book out. And so I really did enjoy the first issue of that as well.
Thanks.
2, why Taco Bell every week? Why?
It's the only restaurant that's exactly in the middle of where we lived.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was
because I can do Taco Bell once every 2 months.
Yeah. You're like, but Scott, we also want to punish our digestive system.
Does Utah have some kind of special sauce where it doesn't fuck your stomach up?
Well,
Like, I need to know.
Is it like the Demolition Man Taco Bell, where it's like the best restaurant in town?
It's like sophisticated. Yeah.
Tim and I just have iron stomachs, and it just happened to be like, yeah, we can go get a taco and a bean burrito, and we're okay, But it was more about like it was just the easy location in between us. They give you a free soda, so like you just kept.
Oh man. Okay, wait a minute. That's just different. That's
Changes
just
everything.
if it's free soda, then
Yeah.
I withdraw all questions.
We can go here and spend $3 and drink,
Yeah.
4 liters of soda over the next 2 hours.
And that's a total of 20 tacos and 4 burritos.
Yeah. That's at $3. Exactly. Making the $3 work for you.
That's amazing. All right, sweet. So, hey, I think Keith, did you have any more follow-up questions?
No. I've been good, man. It's been a great conversation. It's been a blast talking to you, Doug.
Oh yeah, no,
definitely.
I've really enjoyed this, guys. Thanks again for inviting me.
Yeah, I got one more question. So I think we call the end of the segment "Bringing the Bullshit." That's when we're talking about anything not creating comic books. And now I think you and Keith got into that a little bit with some TV shows and stuff like that. Is there anything like are you a collector of things? Do you like my room is insane.
Yeah.
Like just filled with comic books, right? Wall to wall and stuff like that. Are you a collector of stuff? Keith, obviously look at his room. He's got guitars, he's into music. He's buying vinyl. He's buying vinyl, the records, not the comic book, but also the comic book.
All of it. Yeah.
All of the vinyl. Is there anything in particular that you collect? Like, are you picking up comics? And if so, what kind of comics are you picking up right now? Beyond Kickstarter.
Oh yeah, I mean, as you can see, I obviously have a bookshelf full of stuff, and I've got statues and that kind of stuff. I used to collect a lot more, but I've moved quite a bit. And when you're moving, you're kind of like, hey, I'm tired of carrying 20 long boxes down through flights of stairs.
Yes.
What statues are those? I'm trying to check. Are those X-Men on the top right there?
I've got Wolverine, Shadowcat, and Thunderbird up there.
Nice.
Classic Uncanny X-Men from the 90s, 80s kind of stuff. Over there, I've got Naruto and Batgirl. Down there, I've got Darth Maul and the Sith Witch.
Nice.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
What a eclectic group of figures back there.
That's the stuff he likes, right? He's name checked a lot of it throughout the episode, which is great.
Yeah, those are like the small things that I collect. I tell you, do you guys know who Magnetic Press is?
I've heard of Magnetic Press. I do not know specifically.
They're bringing a lot. They're doing a lot. They do everything on Kickstarter, pretty much. I mean, you can order from the website too, but they do a lot of stuff on Kickstarter. And they're bringing European comics, reprinting them in hardcover collections, and doing those. And I'm devouring those.
Are those on Kickstarter? You said?
Or you can get them from the Magnetic Press website as well.
Okay, I'm writing that down.
Okay, because I think I might have. If they do it on Kickstarter, I might have backed some of those Kickstarters because I definitely have some hardcover European-looking books. That's for sure.
I just have no goddamn idea how much I'm spending or what I'm getting on Kickstarter at this point.
I buy so much stuff on Kickstarter. It's crazy. I've switched to, for single issues for the most part, for indie books, I do digital. It's like I don't have the room. I would love to own your comic as well, but it saves me about $8 to $10 if I just do digital. So I've been doing that. But if it's like a hardcover or something like that, I usually, I'll be like, okay, I can have that on my shelf. I like that art a lot.
I love hardcovers too. Yeah, but I mean, that's what I'm loving about that is there's a totally different story style and sense that the European comics have that, American and even manga don't. And so now I'm just devouring this going, wait a minute, they put, because theirs will be oversized in like a different format. And you're like, there's 18 panels on every page. Like, I don't even know if my brain can't process, doing that as a writer. You're like, what?
Yeah.
So,
I would fire my writer.
Well, I mean, but they're doing, you can tell no, that's what they want to do, and it's like, this is really interesting, like a different kind of storytelling. And anytime anything's pushing the envelope in my head, I just keep gravitating towards it and like, how much more of this can I get?
Yeah, I mean that's the creative mind. You're taking in so much creative things, and subconsciously or consciously, you're going, how can I adapt this to my stuff? How can I apply some of this, if not all of this, to my work? And how does that make my work better or different? Or does it not?
Exactly. And doing the same thing with TV, you know, it's like I'm all over the place on TV, and there's some procedurals that I love, and then there's, you know, like you bump into the crazy, you know, strange TV shows, and I'm like, oh man, this is weird. I need to watch this because like it's weird in a good way.
Yeah, it hooks you, right? It hooks you.
I think something right up your alley, and I don't know if you've watched it yet. Keith referred this to me. It's the TV show Bodies.
Oh, I've got it on the list, but I haven't started watching it yet. Yeah,
yeah, it is so good. So it's based off of a graphic novel, apparently.
Dark
Horse.
Yeah, it's loosely based on the Vertigo book from the previous decade, whenever 2015 or something like that.
But the show is aces. So that was my and Keith's TV show of the year for 2023. So highly recommended. You get the sci-fi, you kind of get the noir aspect of it. And
and we all have our soft spots, right? So for me, Doug, one of mine is time travel. I love time travel shit, right? So I'm not going to say it's a time travel book, but it has elements that bake that in pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, because are you guys watching like the current season of Fargo?
No,
I haven't watched Fargo, but I hear nothing but good things, so I need to watch it.
I think it's the 5th season. I didn't see the previous 2, but this one, like, did you guys watch Ted Lasso?
I have not.
So I've watched some of it. I've watched, like my wife watched it multiple times, so I went for like half a cycle on it for a while.
One of the female actors from that, who's very British, is in Fargo, but in this one she's from Minnesota, and she's like the accent's perfect. Like it's weird, and like there's like some weird cult militia stuff going on, and like it's one of those like really weird like detective stories. It's like really interesting.
Okay.
Funny enough, she actually she was trying to go for a different role where she was playing a Southerner, and they were like, "Go audition for Fargo with that because it sounds weird."
Yeah,
I don't know.
She's killing it. Like I was blown away. Like
nice. Okay, I got to check that out. All right. Hey, Keith, you got anything else?
No, I'm good.
Right on. Doug, do you have anything coming up that people should look out for? We know we got Klik Klik Boom, the trade paperback that just came out, I believe, at the beginning of January, right? Yep. Anything else on the horizon? Anything the fans and I should be looking for?
I've got 3 new titles coming out through Image in the next 12 to 18 months. 2 of them are probably going to hit in June after our discussions today. So, and both of those will be in the plastic verse. So,
all right,
so a little bit more dark comedy horror stuff.
Right on. That's awesome.
You know, I'm not allowed to talk about it until they announce it. So
sure. We're still a couple months away from that.
Them mad at me. They've been too good to me.
No, that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, if you ever want to come back and you want to talk about those books when they're coming out or they're about to debut, would love to have you back on.
Yeah. So this,
and then hopefully we can make good on one of those in-person whiskeys one of these days.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Right on. And where can they find you online?
Obviously all the social medias, like usually it's Doug.Wagner13 is where you find me on most of the stuff, like Facebook and Instagram, LinkedIn. I still do, believe it or not, and Twitter or whatever they call it now. And then my website is Shocknoggin, SHOCKNOGGIN.com. And that's, you can get my whole bibliography there. So
awesome.
And then is that linked with 12 Gauge Studios, or is that a completely different site?
Oh, no, that's a completely different site than 12 Gauge.
Okay, that's just you.
Okay. Right on. Awesome, man.
Awesome.
Well, hey, it was so great talking to you, Doug. Thank you for coming on the air with us, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging with us, man.
My pleasure.